Today is June 14th, 2021, and this is Sandra Lafky Carlson, and I'm here in the Tualatin Heritage Center in Tualatin, Oregon, with Stan Schmokel, because we're going to record his oral history and about his family and connections to Tualatin for the Tualatin Historical Society. And Mike Lofton is here also to do the video recording. So, Stan, would you like to start?
Yeah, I'll just take a second to talk about the family, the Tualatin family that we're going to talk about today, the Henrys, how they started out in Virginia, ended up in Tualatin. Just a kind of quick rundown of what happened is that as far back as I can go with them is from 1740, where they William Henry, the earliest Henry that I know about, lived. And of course they, back then, he was a moderate Southern aristocrat. He wasn't as near as big as some of them, but he did have a number of slaves. He had at least 8 slaves, in-house slaves, and I don't know how many field hand slaves he had, but probably quite a few. But his son, well, his actually had more than one. He had several sons. Wasn't the oldest. My Henry wasn't the oldest Henry, so he didn't get anything. That's the way it worked back then. The oldest son got everything, the rest of them didn't get anything. So that's precipitated my ancestor, Benjamin Henry, to move to Kentucky, and they lived there for several generations until the start of the Civil War, and all the Henrys in this particular family sided with the Confederacy and were involved in some battles and things like that. My particular ancestor, by that time we're at Benson, and he fought at he also was in the Confederacy, but he didn't actually be involved in any battles. His job was to get supplies. He would ride the railroads, and when they got to a stop, he would buy all the provisions for the Confederate Army in that area. So he wouldn't buy just a bushel of apples, he'd buy 10 dozen bushels of apples, and everything was a lot of food.
And he was a captain. He had the title of captain.
Yeah, now that's a little bit, at the end of the Civil War, it's kind of erratic. They don't have a lot of documentation. A lot of it got burned up, whatever. So I think he was a captain, and he referred to himself as captain when he got to Fiji Islands and all that sort of stuff. When he had his plantations, he'd always refer himself as Captain B.R. Henry. So whether he was or he wasn't, he thought he was, but there's no record of whether he actually was or not. Anyway, the family started in Virginia, then they went to Kentucky, and then at the start of the Civil War, Benson spent most of the Civil War riding the rails, getting this food and stuff, supplies. And at the end of the war, he managed to talk somebody into buying a ticket, taking him to New York City. And he went to New York, and then somehow he came up with the money enough to take a clipper ship from Liverpool, England, to the Fiji Islands.
So he got to England too.
Oh yeah. Yeah, he went from New York to England, from England to the Fiji Islands. Well, I think he made a stop in Australia before he got to the Fiji Islands, but and that was around 1870 or so. there's always a question about everything he does is where he came up with the money to do all the things that he did. And I think he was a good talker. I think he was a real good talker. And he could convince people that, this was in their best interest to give him money. Anyway, what they wanted to do was pretty much set up, since they couldn't have plantations, they couldn't have the setup that they had in the southern U.S. anymore. They and some Australian people and some ex-Confederates, they went to the Fiji Islands. They thought that was a good place to carry on, to have plantations there. So they did, and I think what happened was all these islands, the Fiji Islands, were ruled by different rulers, and so they got a compliant chieftain there that would sell them land for their plantations real cheap. So they all had their plantations, and this is a view of some of the plantations that they had. You can see how it's all divided up into different people's plantations. And this was set up during 1870 to 1872 or 3. They set up this stuff. And I have a picture of their plantation, their stylized version of their plantation. I'm not sure exactly where I put that. Well, that's okay. This also shows. This is a little bit more than just these plantations. This is the main city in the Fiji Islands called Suva, and his one plantation was right in what would be the middle of Suva today. So what happened was that the British, they weren't too keen on these plantations. They had done away with slavery. They had done away with the plantation systems in England, and they weren't too keen about having these foreigners come and try to set up plantations in the Fiji Islands. So on a trip that my great-grandfather Benson took back to California, and I'm not sure exactly why he came back to California, but while he was gone from the Fiji Islands, the British government nationalized all the plantations, and so when he got back, all the plantations were gone. So he spent basically the rest of his life and his daughter's life trying to get his plantations back, and it didn't work. It didn't work. The British said, well, you'll have to talk to the Fiji Island people. They're in charge now because they had given Fiji their freedom. So the Fiji Island people would say, well, sorry, that all happened when the British were here, and you need to talk to them. So what happened is it went round and round and round, and he never ended up getting his plantations back. But he said he enriched a lot of lawyers, I think, in the meantime. So anyway, that's how Benson ended up. When he couldn't go back to the Fiji Islands, he went to California, to Alameda, and was there for a while.
And he had married by then, hadn't he?
Yeah. He had married Ada Smith.
Who he met there in Fiji.
Yeah, she was actually an Australian, but she was living in the Fiji Islands, and he met her and married her. She was only 15, he was 37, so I guess typical for the time.
Yes. And it's interesting there you have a document somewhere that's kind of documents their marriage.
Marriage license, yes.
And it refers to him as a bachelor and her as a spinster, even though she was only 15. But I guess back in the 1800s, all unmarried women, no matter their age, were often referred to as spinsters.
I suppose if you're single, I guess you're considered a spinster, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he left me with all kinds of little things. He was a saver of information. So anyway, I think we're back. Well, I will mention one thing. He was in California for a short time, and then he went back to the Hawaiian Islands, and he was a roving reporter for a lot of different newspapers, and he sent dispatches from the Hawaiian Islands about how great it was and all the things that he was doing there. And he did that for several years. And this is something that was new to me. I didn't realize this. He organized, or he got in touch with his farmers group in Oregon, and he wanted them to come to the Fiji Islands and, or not the Fiji Islands, to Hawaiian Islands and set up farms there. And he actually got some people that were actually going to do it. They were actually getting ready to do it. But they had a little revolt in the Hawaiian Islands at the time because the native population didn't like the idea of all these foreigners coming in and buying their property. So they had it wasn't really a revolution or anything like that, but it scared off all the farmers. And so ended up none of them decided to come from America to Hawaii. So that didn't work out too good for him, but anyway, so he was the roving reporter for these different newspapers until probably just after the turn of the century, 1902, 1903, he kind of decided to settle down. And
well, you know, before that, because I'm excited to tell this because I read it yesterday in the documentation you gave, that he was actually a representative in the state legislature in around the 1890s?
I think it was a little earlier than that, but yeah, he was a representative from Brownsville in the state legislature.
Yeah, and he was on the education committee for a while.
Now, why he moved from Brownsville up to Tualatin, I really don't know. There must have been some reason why he did it. But anyway, he came up, and my grandfather was, at the time, was a chef on the railroad on the Northern Pacific. It ran back and forth from Portland to Minneapolis. So he. And
that was Charles Schmokel, your grandfather. Right.
And I've got some pictures of, let's see. Well, somewhere I have some pictures of the Schmokels. Oh, here it is. So this is my great grandfather and his family.
Your grandfather.
Yeah, I guess it would be my grandfather.
B.R. Henry was your great.
Yeah, okay, that's right. You're right. It's kind of confusing.
Yeah, you have a lot of them.
Anyway, this is a picture of them. And this is my grandmother, Hester, my father, Charles, and my uncle, Willard, and my aunt, Irene. I'm not in the picture yet because I was born later.
Yeah, and your dad.
My dad was born later.
Yeah.
So anyway, to make matters kind of clear, when my great-grandfather got to Tualatin, he got my grandfather, Charles, to come to live on the farm, to leave the railroad and come to live on the farm in Tualatin. And so eventually he talked them into coming. So he came, and he also wrote letters to his brother, John Henry, to come to Oregon and live with him. So eventually he managed to talk John into coming. This is a picture of John and my great-grandfather Benson at the farm.
So Benson is the one on the right with the beard.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Right.
And then John, his brother.
Right.
Yeah. And I remember when your great-grandfather Benson was still in California,
Mm-hmm.
he lived near San Francisco for a
He
time.
did, in Alameda.
And he loved it there. I guess he had given up on Fiji.
He never gave up on Fiji,
Oh.
but yeah, he wasn't getting it back. So
Yeah. But so when in his letters, when he's trying to persuade some of his family to come to California, and he was saying, you know, the weather is great. He said that the hunting and the fishing is wonderful. There's lots of deer and elk and squirrel, and you can make a lot of money, because he was always thinking about those, you know, projects or ways to make money.
And I think actually one of his brothers did come, and he was a doctor, and he moved somewhere around the Bay Area somewhere. I'm not sure. I could find it, but I'm not sure exactly where it was. But so he was always trying to get people to do things, and usually he managed to do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he cared about his family. I mean, he wrote so many letters.
Oh yeah.
And
yeah, because most of his family was still back in Kentucky.
mm-hmm.
In fact, his great cousins and whatever are still there today, around Harrison County. Their headquarters was Cynthiana, Kentucky, which if you ever get a map of Kentucky and take a look and see where Cincinnati is and come straight south about 60 miles, you'll come upon Cynthiana.
Oh. And do you have any idea why he came to Oregon, why he left California? And
I'm not sure why. I guess he got a better deal, or he thought he was going to get a better deal. But yeah, why he left California, I'm not sure.
yeah. Or maybe his brother John came here first?
No, he convinced John to come. John came in the late 1870s to Tualatin. So why he left California to come to Brownsville, Oregon, and why he left Brownsville to come to Tualatin, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. But he wasn't afraid to travel, my goodness.
Oh no, when a lot of people didn't get 10 miles from where they were born,
Yeah,
he went tens of thousands of miles.
yeah. Wow.
They didn't have jets, they didn't have ships, their ships had sails on them.
Yeah, and it must have taken a month or more to go from this continent to Fiji or...
Oh, it took a lot longer. I think it took about 2 to 3 months to get there. Yeah.
Yeah. And he, so he was in his 60s then, about when he came to Tualatin. And
Oh, let's see. That would have been in the... Because I think he convinced my grandfather to come from the railroad to probably, I would say, in the 1870s sometime, and then within a couple of years, he convinced John to come.
Mm-hmm.
I think he needed somebody to run the farm while he was out running around.
Yeah.
Because he didn't spend a great amount of time in any one place. He was always going from one thing to another. And why he left Hawaii to come back to the United States, I don't know why either.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the natives may have been upset with him for trying to organize this this bringing these farmers to there when they had too many Americans living in the Hawaiian Islands at the time anyway. At least the natives thought so anyway.
But when he settled in Tualatin, then he really got involved in the community too, because he was the first grange master of the Winona Grange here in Tualatin, and he was a trustee of the first church around 1900. So he was very involved.
He was a talker and a joiner, I think.
Yeah.
And of course, even John got involved a little bit. He was the head of the Templars. I guess they were the forerunners of the AA, the Anti-Alcohol League. He was the state chairman of the Templars. So he did a little politicking himself.
Huh. Well, another thing I read about John was there was a letter from the San Francisco Examiner newspaper back around 1900 thanking John for getting them more subscriptions up here. And they must have paid him, I think they paid him something for them, and really imploring him to get more subscriptions. So he was pretty much an entrepreneur too.
Yeah, I think he was a talker, but I think he was a talker. I think Benson was a champion talker because he got John, to stay on the farm most of the time while he was running around the world, pretty much. So.
And his wife, Ada Lillian Smith, BR married in Fiji, and then she came with him to California. So she passed away about 1900, was it?
I think it was even before that. I think it was 1890 or so.
Okay.
I don't know. Oh, here it is. Let's see. It says here that she died in 1890. So she died pretty young.
Yeah.
And two of her children also died young.
Yeah.
One of them died probably from some childhood disease at 4 years old. And the other one died, and it's kind of interesting, in a football accident. Apparently he must have got kicked in the head or something like that in a football game.
And they didn't wear
not in those
Yeah.
days. They probably didn't wear any helmets at all.
Yeah.
Anyway, he was just unlucky.
So BR just had one child who lived to be an adult, and that
Right.
was your grandmother,
Hester.
Hester Lillian.
Right.
And so she married Charles Schmokel and
Right.
they lived for a time here in Tualatin.
Oh, they lived there actually quite a long time. Let's see, he came off the railroad in the mid-1870s, and they were on the farm until the 1930s. Hester came down with diabetes in 1935, and that was before insulin, so it was a kind of a death sentence for her. She didn't last long. And then not too long after that, in 1936, is where Charles died. So, and you can see it in these photographs of them. I mean, it looks like they really went downhill health-wise. They don't look very well in the last few photos we have of them. So, and of course, BR finally settled down a little bit in the 1907, 1908 era. I think his health was probably starting to go kind of bad around then. So he died in 1910. So he was about 73, I think, something like that. And John lasted 3 years longer than that. He died in 1913.
Oh, okay.
So he was born in 1840. and died in 1913.
And they're both buried in the Winona Cemetery here?
Well, I know BR is, I think John is too. And my folks are there
Well,
too.
they are.
Hmm.
And John, did John ever marry your Uncle
No.
John?
He was a bachelor.
So they had, so so B.R. Henry and his brother John had the farm, 60-acre farm here in Tualatin, and it was right about at the confluence of Avery Road and Tualatin Sherwood Road.
Right.
On the north side. I think.
Yeah, I never got a chance to see their place. I think it had gotten torn down before I had gotten out there. I did go to the Seminoles' house before they sold it, and that was quite an experience. She was a saver too.
Oh.
Elsie Mae Seminole.
Oh.
She was a real saver. You went into her house and she had stuff stacked up to the ceiling, and it was kind of like a little hall, little alleyways to get around their house.
Huh.
So it was kind of a strange thing.
Some of us are like that. But
Yeah, super saver.
so what happened to the farm after B.R. and his brother John passed away?
Well, of course, the Schmokels were still there.
Oh, your grandparents
Uh-huh.
took care of it.
Yeah, and my dad was, even though he was an engineer and went to work for Mobil Oil, I think he always loved working in the garden. He always had big, huge gardens and stuff like that. And I think that his what he wanted to do was he wanted to somehow combine farming and being an engineer. So when my grandparents died in the mid-30s, 1930s, my uncle, which would be Willard, since he was the oldest, he was named the executor of this estate, and he was also an alcoholic, and he drank up all the profits from the sale of the property. My dad wouldn't. I don't think he wanted to sell it at all. I think he wanted to keep it and somehow have a farm and work in the city too. That wasn't available to him because Willard had blown all the money. So that had a rift between Willard and my dad that never got healed. My dad always really blamed my brother or my uncle Willard for losing the farm.
And that had been a pretty prosperous or industrious farm because you said they grew a lot of produce that they would take by wagon.
Yeah, and then of course they built a road. He got a Model T, and so my dad was just on the edge of when they did away with the horse and buggy and got a Model T to go to the Portland. They went to the big market there with their stuff. And like I said, I've never seen a picture of their property other than that one shot we have of their house. But I think they had some greenhouses there and they were able to grow stuff in the off season.
Well, there is one photo that you brought that it's a small photo, but it shows 3 or 4 people standing in front of a very high-ceilinged greenhouse. And
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know what the plants were, whether they were hops or...
Yeah.
But I didn't know they had big greenhouses then. But
Well, apparently they did something to grow crops in the wintertime because that's how they kept going. They were marginally, I mean, they got by. They weren't really well off, but they got by. But I think the Depression really, really hurt them badly. And whether they could have kept the farm, even if they had lived, through the 30s, debatable. they didn't have a lot of money, but they made do with what they had. And of course, my aunt and my uncle, quite a bit older than my dad, so eventually, and I don't think Willard, once he got into his 30s, he was pretty much consumed with alcohol by then, so he didn't really contribute much.
But your dad did grow up in Tualatin.
He did.
He was born in 1910.
He was born in 1912.
Okay.
And he lived in Tualatin until my grandparents died in the 1930s. And then he worked, and then he came to the city because my Aunt Irene, her husband, had a grocery store. And I think that's where a lot of their produce probably went, his grocery store. So he worked at the grocery store for 3 or 4 years until he got up enough money to go to Oregon State.
Oh, he did. Huh.
So he actually graduated from Oregon State in the late 30s. So he graduated from high school in 1929, and he ended up graduating from Oregon State in 1939. Most of that 10 years between the times when he was just working to get money so he could go to school. And that's where he met his wife, my mother.
And what was her name?
What was her name?
Yes.
Carol Schmokel. And so anyway, she lived right down the street from where my Aunt Irene lived. So that's how they got to know each other. So anyway, they got married, and then appeared all my brothers and sisters.
How many?
Well, let's see. I had, counting me, four brothers and 1 sister. And 2 of them, or 3 of them, my eldest brother, Charlie, and myself and my sister are alive. My other 2 brothers passed away. One of them just this last year. So anyway, there's 3 of the 5 still left. And
there's a story also about your dad when he was growing up in Tualatin, Melvin, or Mike, as he was known. He caddied at the golf course.
He did a lot of things. He set up a little trap system where he could go around and trap squirrels and other little animals, and eat the process and save the skins for whatever.
Huh.
So he did all kinds of things. He loved the farm.
And he was he caddied for a Mr. Cohn at the golf course, who gave him a letter of recommendation for a job at Standard Oil, which he did get.
He actually worked. He may have started at Standard, but he actually spent his whole career at Mobil Oil.
Oh, okay.
They had a big plant down by the St. John's Bridge. Actually, some of it's still there, and so that's where he worked, and he lived in several different. While he was working for Mobil Oil, he worked in Portland, and then he got transferred to Seattle for a few years. Then he came back to Portland and rented a house in North Portland. That's kind of the earliest I remember of places we lived, was in North Portland. And then when I was about 6 or so, 7, we moved to Beaverton and lived there for a number of years. He had my mom and dad have had a house there for, gosh, about close to 40 years. So they they saw a lot of changes. In Beaverton, had about 1,000 people when they moved there, and then had about 20, 30,000 by the time they left. And now it's got over 100,000.
Yeah. And the land, the farm that your ancestors had here in Tualatin, and then after your grandparents died, so I imagine it was sold to somebody. Do you remember?
I have no idea. I think it was some kind of a warehouse distribution center of some sort.
Okay.
Because we went by one time and when we were visiting the Seminoles, and I think that ended up to be some kind of a warehouse or something, or maybe it was a shopping mall, I don't really know, but their house eventually went after that. We always used to, when a couple times when my dad was visiting the Seminoles, they were the best friends because they went to school together. We went out, he had a big swamp out in the back part of his property.
Of the Seminoles?
Well, I think probably the Schmokels probably had one too, but you go back in the back part where the swamp was, there'd all be all these old farm machineries and stuff like that was back there, old cars, old, they would just, this is not working anymore, or this is, I don't need this anymore, I'll just put it back in the swamp. So there was all kinds of, like a little junkyard back there. But all that got, destroyed. I'm sure they filled in the swamp and put their warehouses and I couldn't find where that was because I can't find my way around Tualatin anymore. It's so changed from what it used to be, So I've been coming out to Tualatin periodically, probably, I don't know, into the 50s, 60s. I kind of gave up on Tualatin after that, this area here just got too commercialized. Yeah. I couldn't find my way around here. I have to leave early so I can find my way around here anymore.
So where do you live now?
I live in southeast Portland, in Westmoreland. Know where that's at? Yeah, that's a very, very calm and peaceful neighborhood. Our cat can go out and lay in the street for half an hour and not worry about getting run down. So it's totally different than this area is now, or Beaverton, or Hillsborough, or any of that sort of stuff. In southeast Portland, at least the area we live in, is very, very calm and mellowed. We can walk every place, all the stores that you might need something from, or either in Selwood downtown or in Westmoreland downtown. And from my house, you can walk to either one in about 10 minutes. So if you want a grocery store, we've got grocery stores. You want to go to the theater, we've got a movie house there, post office, all kinds of restaurants.
Sounds like a nice neighborhood.
Well, it is. Everything's walkable. You can walk to any place you want to do something. They even got a new drugstore, which we didn't have. Now we have a new drugstore, urgent care clinic. Another question. Did you go into engineering like your father? No, I went into political science and worked for the post office for a number of years. And retired from that, and now I just do standardized patient work at Oregon State University, or Oregon Health Science University, OHSU. In fact, I've got something tomorrow, and something the next day after that. I try to limit myself to 2 days a week.
Uh-huh.
So,
Sounds
but
good.
everything I earn from that just goes to trips, for trips. So the more I work, the better trips I can take.
Oh, good. I have one last question I'm really curious about, because your great-grandfather, B.R.
Uh-huh.
Henry, mentioned, the good hunting around San Francisco, when he was living there, and good hunting for squirrels, and then you mentioned that your dad would trap or hunt squirrels. Have you ever eaten squirrel?
I have not. No, we got a ton of them in our neighborhood. They're everywhere.
Yeah, I have some in my backyard.
Yeah, they're tree squirrels. At least the ones in Westmoreland are tree squirrels. So you look up in there and you can see their little nest up in the trees.
I don't know what kind of eating they would make.
I don't know. I guess they're all right. I mean, people have been eating them for years, so I guess they're.
I think it tastes like chipmunk.
But
I
yeah,
wouldn't know what that tastes like either.
I think my dad trapped anything that he could catch. I think if he's happened to get a skunk or he happened to get a, whatever,
Yeah.
he would probably skin it, and
Oh.
they may have eaten. I really don't know, but they may have eaten the meat.
Mm-hmm.
But I think he, probably went down and sold it at some store for like a quarter for one of these little,
Mm-hmm.
squirrel skins or
Yeah,
skunk skins or whatever he happened to catch.
yeah. I mean, you hear about people hunting possum. I'm not sure if that around here, but,
Well, they've got possums here. I've seen them.
and do people hunt them?
Well, I don't know. They seem to go in series. Like for a while, there'd be raccoons. Everywhere you look, there'd be raccoons,
Mhm.
And then they get too many, and then they get distemper or some kind of disease, and they kind of die off, and then something else takes its place. Then there's a big rush to possums, and they come in there, and they're everywhere,
Mhm.
and then they die off, and then some other critter will take over, at least temporarily.
Yeah, yeah. Balance of nature. I think that's about it, unless there's anything else you wanted to add about
Well,
your family and.
let's see if well, this is kind of interesting. It's a little hard to read, but it's a marriage license back from I think it's my ancestor Benjamin Henry, who is the son of William Henry, and it's from the early 1800s, it might even be from the 1700s. It's about I think it's the late 1700s, like 1790, something like that. And it's pretty interesting to read it. It's a little hard because the printing is a little faded in spots, but the bride is only mentioned once in this whole full thing. The rest of the time is spent by the groom and the father of the bride, apparently, trying to hash out how much money they were going to get, how much money they were going to give to him so that he will allow this marriage to happen.
Hmm.
It's pretty interesting. Yeah, it's a financial deal. It's not a love interest. At least it wasn't in those times.
Oh, I guess, yeah. And also there's a document in all your material of a marriage insurance policy that
exactly.
B.R.
Yeah,
Henry
he took out.
About the time, or actually I think it was more like 4 or 5 years after his marriage to Ada, and I've never heard of a marriage insurance
Well,
policy.
apparently they had that in the day. And he decided to get that, or he tried to get that. I don't think it ever went through. I don't think he ever got it, but he tried to set this up because Ada had died young, And so he had these little young kids to take care of. And he wasn't really enthused about that because it would interfere with his travels, I think. So he was trying to buy this marriage insurance so that if he married somebody and then it didn't work out, he'd get at least some of his money back that he gave for this insurance policy. And I think that was it. He wanted to find somebody that would take care of his kids while he was out traveling the world. So that's why he got it. And I don't think he ever, like I say, I don't think he ever got it, but he at least looked into it.
Yeah. Interesting how times change.
Do you want to, maybe they might be interested in seeing what the ticket for the clipper ship looks like, and maybe some Confederate money.
Oh.
That might be of interest to them.
The
And maybe a
contract
picture
ticket.
of the Fiji island, yeah.
Okay.
So this is some stuff that he saved along with everything else that you might be interested if you've never seen any Confederate money. Here's some Confederate money that he saved. And then we also have he also saved the clipper ship ticket from London, from England, Liverpool, England, to Australia and the Fiji Islands. This is what it looked like.
Does it say how much the ticket
I think it
cost?
does. If you look at it, it's pretty spendy. It's in pounds. And it's quite a bit, I think. I think it's like 3,100 pounds. Be a lot of money. Somehow he got somebody to give him the money to do it, though.
Yeah.
This is a picture of supposedly a picture of his plantation in the Fiji Islands. I have a feeling it probably wasn't quite as nice as this makes it out to be.
Is that a photograph or a drawing?
That is a drawing.
Okay. So that might have been his idea of what he wanted?
Yeah, I mean, it could be accurate. I mean, the picture of the clipper ship was pretty accurate. But I have a feeling that it probably wasn't quite this nice. He got all this stuff because he only had these this plantation for 3 or 4 years before the British nationalized everything. So I doubt he had time to get all this stuff made. This might have been a headquarters, maybe, of the whole troop of investors, maybe. I don't know. And Benson, true to his upbringing and his whatever, he was a very, very racist person. And he wanted to set up in Fiji Islands what they had lost in America during the Civil War with a new plantation. And I think that he wanted to, get the islanders to be I probably wouldn't call them slaves, but his indentured people. But it fortunately never came to pass. The British knocked it down, and then it started the circular thing. Nobody wanted to claim that they owed him any money, or any of the other people that went in on the deal. I think there was probably at least 8 or 10, or maybe more, investors from the United States, from Australia, from maybe New Zealand, that wanted to. I think he probably talked to them and convinced them that this is what they wanted to do. They wanted to grow, I think, sugarcane and to make a fortune.
Yeah.
So.
Well, he was certainly an interesting person and had a varied life.
He was, and he did a lot of traveling, a lot of talking to people.
Yeah.
And he kept in everybody's good graces. And he was, like I say, he had a big article here about his trips and meeting with the Cannibal King, which I don't think he ever did. In fact, I'm pretty positive he never did. But he had a big write-up in the Atlanta Constitution, which was the biggest paper in the southern U.S. So they believed him.
Yeah, he was a good writer. And,
Yeah, he was a good writer. Good writer and a good talker.
And yeah, and had these visions of, you know, what he wanted to do. And
Mhm.
so you have to admire that.
He did.
But,
He did.
Well, thank you very much, Stan, for
That's quite all right.
talking about your family, your interesting family, and their connection to Tualatin, and sharing all this documentation.
Yeah. Well, he was, I think, not only he, but his family was the savers. So, can't imagine the amount of stuff I threw out. And I still have kind of a fairly good-sized trunk full of stuff
Wow.
from him.
Okay.
Well, how'd that go? That went about an hour or so, or maybe a little less?